Mind Architect Lab Deep Dive.
Welcome to the Mind Architect Lab. Lena, I'm looking at the research dossier the team just handed us on dopamine fasting and the neuroscience of virtue. It is dense data.
It's a gold mine, Eris. And architects, you don't have to just listen. You can access this full raw data in the description below right now.
Let's deconstruct it. Lena, what is the core pattern here?
Well, the core pattern is a fascinating, almost painful irony that our sources really zeroed in on.
An irony.
A huge one. We are seeing this curious behavioral phenomenon. You could almost call it a mass retreat. And it's happening specifically among the very people who built our modern attention ecosystem.
You're talking about Silicon Valley.
Exactly. The engineers, the product designers, the minds who, perfected the infinite scroll and the variable reward loop, the ones who made these platforms so compelling.
So what are they doing?
They're now the ones practicing these rigorous, almost quasi-monastic protocols to escape the very digital environments they designed. They call it dopamine fasting.
And this is where I want to press pause immediately right at the start, because this practice, it's been popularized by figures like Dr. Cameron Sipa. It's defined as this deliberate, temporary restriction of high stimulation activities.
Right. Things like social media, video games, ultra-processed foods. Sometimes it's even listening to music or cutting out non-essential conversation.
But let's be blunt here. Is dopamine fasting really just a clever clinical rebranding? Is it fundamentally any different from, say, Lent or other traditional forms of withdrawal and abstinence?
Is the term itself a bit of Silicon Valley hyperbole?
Exactly. Is this just old wine in a new biohacked bottle?
Well, that skepticism is perfectly placed and, it leads directly to the core thesis of our deep dive today.
Okay.
The terminology is definitely new. It sounds clinical, scientific. The aesthetic is often minimalist. It's all about performance optimization.
Sure.
But the underlying principle is ancient. This is not a biohacking novelty, Eris. If you strip away all the neurochemical jargon, what you have left is the foundational ancient virtue of temperance.
Or sophrosyne in the Greek.
Precisely. It's been rebranded for a scientific and, frankly, a secular age. And our mission today is to show you exactly how those ancient philosophers, in a way, anticipated the neurobiology of modern addiction.
Okay, that's a big claim, so let's unpack it. We have to start with the context. Why has temperance, or this fast, become not just a moral goal, but what feels like a clinical requirement for so many people today?
To understand that, you have to go way back. It starts with the evolutionary history of the human brain.
The deep history.
The deepest. The first, and maybe the most crucial insight from the sources, is this profound disconnect between our ancient hardware and our modern operating environment.
An evolutionary mismatch.
A huge one. For almost all of human history, the brain evolved under these relentless conditions of scarcity.
Right. Finding calories was hard. Ensuring your own safety was a full-time job. Acquiring new, useful information was incredibly difficult.
It was all work.
Yeah.
So our brains developed these exquisitely sensitive, really robust mechanisms to seek out, consume, and hoard any rewards it could find.
So if you stumbled upon a calorie-dense patch of berries or made a new, important social connection, your brain would reward you massively. It would dump chemicals to make sure you remembered that action and, crucially, repeated it.
These mechanisms were absolutely critical for survival. That system was perfectly calibrated for a world of scarcity.
Like today.
Today, that entire script has been flipped on its head. We live in a landscape of what the report calls hyperabundance, infinite accessibility.
And those same survival mechanisms, the ones that were once our reliable guides to flourishing.
They become liabilities. They are now operating at maximum capacity 24/7. And it's leading to chronic, low-grade dependency and what some of the researchers are calling spiritual exhaustion.
This really explains the modern pathology so well because our environment is now just saturated with what are called supernormal stimuli.
That's a key term.
It is. It originally comes from ethology, the study of animal behavior. It describes these artificial exaggerations that completely hijack an animal's instinctive drives.
Right, like the famous example of a bird that prefers to sit on a huge, brightly painted fake egg instead of its own, smaller, naturally colored eggs.
Exactly. And our modern world has essentially created supernormal versions of almost every single natural reward.
Let's get specific. Let's detail some of these, starting with the most immediate one, nutritional supernormal stimuli.
And we are not talking about simple whole foods here, not an apple or a piece of fish.
No. We are talking about ultra-processed foods. Foods that are engineered with scientific precision to hit what sensory researchers call the bliss point.
The bliss point. That's another key term. It's the perfect mathematically calculated ratio of sugar, fat, and salt.
A ratio designed to maximize palatability and, critically, to bypass the brain's natural satiety mechanisms, the I'm full signals.
Exactly. So when you eat an apple, your brain registers the fiber, the water, the nutrients, and it says, okay, that was 80 calories. Good job, mission accomplished. But when you eat a processed food and engineer it at that bliss point,
it overrides what's called sensory-specific satiety. That's the mechanism that usually tells you to stop eating one type of food.
Your brain is just getting such a concentrated, supernormal reward signal that it screams for more, even when your body has absolutely no need for the fuel.
Then you have the most pervasive form, the one that's everywhere. Digital supernormal stimuli.
The infinite scrolling feeds, the constant stream of notifications, likes, comments, pings.
This all operates in a very specific psychological mechanism. It's known as the intermittent variable reward schedule.
This is pure slot machine psychology. It's what makes gambling so addictive. If you got a reward every single time, predictably.
It would get boring. It loses its power very quickly.
Right, but if you sometimes get a massive reward, a post goes viral, you get that critical email, you see some breaking news, and sometimes you get nothing.
That unpredictability, that variability drives the seeking behavior into absolute overdrive. It keeps your dopamine system on constant high alert, just anticipating the next potential win that might be just one more scroll away.
No natural face-to-face social interaction could ever match that speed, that velocity, or that randomness. It's not a fair fight.
And finally, the sources highlight a third category, which is sexual supernormal stimuli. They focus particularly on high-speed internet pornography.
And here, the supernormal aspect is the unrelenting diversity and intensity that's available. It triggers something called the Coolidge effect on a continuous loop.
For anyone who's unfamiliar, the Coolidge effect is a well-documented psychological phenomenon. It's where a male subject in studies will lose sexual interest in a familiar, available partner, but then immediately regains that interest when a novel, new partner is introduced.
That mechanism made perfect evolutionary sense. In a natural environment, it would encourage genetic diversity. But when novelty is infinite, instantly available, and presented with an intensity that real life can't match,
it completely overwhelms the natural pair bonding and reward systems. It can lead to desensitization and often a diminished capacity for satisfaction in real-world relationships.
It is a textbook example of a supernormal stimulus hijacking an ancient and otherwise healthy drive.
So the sum total of all of this is what the sources call the modern malaise. The brain is not suffering from a lack of pleasure. It's suffering from an overdose of cheap, intense, and artificial pleasure.
And that overdose leads directly to the symptoms that are described in the research. Things like chronic, low-grade anxiety, that debilitating brain fog, high levels of irritability.
And the most profound one, the real tragedy of it all, anhedonia. The inability to feel genuine pleasure from the simple, natural rhythms of life.
So the key takeaway here, the refined thesis, is this. This suffering is not a moral failing. You're not weak. It's a biological mismatch.
It's an engineering problem.
Precisely. And therefore, the fast or the practice of temperance, it's not about deprivation. It is liberation.
It's a necessary kind of neurological hygiene. It's required to silence the constant noise of these supernormal stimuli and restore the baseline sensitivity that allows true, sustainable joy to even register again.
We have to understand the machine to fix the environment. And to do that, to understand this restoration process, we have to go deeper into the core neurochemistry.
We have to get beyond the moral terms and just look at the machinery itself.
Exactly. So let's start by correcting the single biggest misconception about the star of this whole show, dopamine.
Absolutely. The popular myth that dopamine is the pleasure molecule just completely obscures its true critical function.
Yeah.
And that confusion, that misunderstanding, actually prevents effective recovery.
So what is it then?
Dopamine is not the chemical of having or contentment. It is the chemical of wanting.
Define that wanting for us specifically.
It's the neurotransmitter of desire, of anticipation, of pursuit. It's what neuroscientists call incentive salience.
Incentive salience.
Yes, it provides the get up and go, the motivation, the seeking behavior. It's the itch that demands to be scratched.
And this whole system is centralized somewhere in the brain.
It is. It's in the mesolimbic pathway. It originates deep in the midbrain in a place called the ventral tegmental area, or VTA. And from there, it projects aggressively to the nucleus accumbens, the NAC. That circuit, that's the engine of motivation.
Okay, so if dopamine is the pursuit, the chase, the wanting, what chemical system mediates the actual satisfaction, the prize at the end?
The actual experience of satisfaction, that feeling of liking, or what's called hedonic impact, is mediated by entirely different systems.
Not dopamine at all.
No. These are primarily the endogenous opioid and endocannabinoid systems. They are what give us that warm, settled feeling of contentment after a goal is achieved. They are the chemical systems of having or enough.
And this is where it gets really interesting because this distinction explains the core of modern addiction. It highlights what the researchers call the decoupling phenomenon.
Yes, this is so important to understand.
So tell us how that decoupling works.
Okay, so when your system is flooded with these supernormal stimuli, say you're hitting that bliss point constantly with processed sugar, your dopamine system, the wanting system, becomes massively, chronically activated.
The engine is just redlining.
Constantly. But the liking system, the opioids, they can't keep up with that artificial intensity and speed. They get exhausted. So what happens is you find yourself compulsively engaging in a behavior.
Doomscrolling, overeating, gambling.
Driven by this screaming, desperate sense of wanting, while at the same time deriving zero pleasure from the act itself. You might even be actively hating yourself while you're doing it.
And that disconnect is the precise neurological definition of addiction. The persistence of seeking behavior despite diminishing returns and often catastrophic consequences.
The supernormal stimuli are just these hyperpotent drivers. They override all the natural checks and balances, creating a massive, constant wanting loop, while the true satisfaction system inside that loop simply starves.
So to understand why the fast is necessary, we have to talk about how the brain fights back against this.
We have to introduce this concept that the brain is a fiercely homeostatic organ. It's always trying to maintain balance. It does not tolerate prolonged deviations from equilibrium.
So when we constantly bombard it with these massive pleasure spikes,
It fights back aggressively to restore balance.
and this is where Dr. Anna Lemke's teeter-totter or balance scale metaphor from the source material is just so invaluable.
It's a fantastic visual.
Imagine that scale, that teeter-totter with pleasure on one side and pain on the other. A high dopamine activity, like eating a candy bar or getting 100 likes, tips the scale sharply toward pleasure.
But the brain views that sharp deviation as biologically expensive. It's dangerous from an evolutionary standpoint. So it has to regulate itself. It has to push back.
And how does it do that? What's the primary mechanism?
The brain's main defensive regulatory mechanism is receptor downregulation.
Okay, break that down.
D2 receptors are the crucial docking stations for the dopamine signal. When they are bombarded relentlessly, which is exactly what happens with chronic consumption of these stimuli, the neuron protects itself.
It's overwhelmed.
It is. So it literally reduces the number or the sensitivity of those available receptors. It's like it's pulling up the drawbridge to stop the flood.
And that reduction in receptor sensitivity is exactly what we experience as tolerance.
Yes. You suddenly need a stronger stimulus, a bigger dopamine hit, just to register the same level of effect you used to get from a much smaller one. You're chasing a high that's getting harder and harder to reach.
But the true cost, the real hidden danger, comes from the overcorrection.
This is the opponent process theory. For every massive tip of the scale toward pleasure, the brain creates an equal and opposite compensatory shift toward pain to force the system back to neutral.
It's like Newton's third law for neurochemistry.
It is. And when the pleasure stimulus ends, those compensatory forces, which Dr. Lemke personifies as these little neuroadaptation gremlins, they don't just disappear instantly.
They stay on the pain side of the teeter-totter.
They do, and crucially, if that intense pleasure stimulus is repeated chronically, day after day, these gremlins get heavier, and they stay on the pain side longer and longer.
This is what shifts the entire hedonic set point downwards. Your baseline level of happiness literally drops.
That results in a chronic dopamine deficit state. This is the state where you are clinically suffering even when you aren't consuming the addictive substance or engaging in the behavior. The scale is now permanently tipped toward the pain side.
And this manifests in profound way. It's not just the anhedonia we mentioned, that flatness where nothing brings you joy anymore.
No, it also shows up as extremely low stress tolerance.
Right. Minor inconveniences, things that a healthy brain would just dismiss, getting cut off in traffic, a slow internet connection. They now trigger this disproportionate irritability, this dup anxiety and frustration.
And crucially, this deficit state is what leads to compulsive consumption purely to escape the pain. You are no longer consuming the sugar or scrolling your phone for pleasure.
You're just trying to get back to zero.
Exactly. You're doing it simply to bring the pain side of the teeter-totter back to level just to feel normal. The drug has become the medicine for the withdrawal that it itself caused.
And there's also a devastating cognitive cost to this state. The sources are clear that low D2 receptor availability is highly correlated with reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex, the PFC.
That's the part of the brain responsible for executive function, inhibitory control, future planning, weighing consequences.
And this phenomenon is called hypofrontality. It's consistently observed in addiction studies. The front part of the brain basically goes dark.
This is a critical point because it links the modern science directly back to the ancient philosophy. Hypofrontality means your rational, long-term planning brain is literally weakened. It's underpowered.
It's like trying to run complex, demanding software on a computer whose main processor is only getting 10% of its required electricity.
It struggles with complex tasks. It ignores warning signs. It defaults to the simplest, most immediate programming, which is get the reward now.
This is why deep work becomes impossible. Delayed gratification disappears. And error correction, the ability to stop yourself from making the same mistake over and over, it just fails.
So the biological cure, the so-called dopamine fast, is not simply about willpower or abstinence. It's a strategic intervention.
You're trying to change the hardware.
Exactly. Stopping the constant influx of high dopamine stimuli allows those pain gremlins to finally hop off the balance. And then, sensing the sudden scarcity of dopamine, the brain begins its self-healing process.
It begins to upregulate D2 receptors.
Yes. It grows new ones, or it makes the existing ones more sensitive to capture the neurotransmitter that is now harder to find. And in doing so, it restores the baseline sensitivity and it begins to fix that hypofrontality.
So it's a waiting game. It's a period of allowing the system to recalibrate itself back to its factory settings.
You're waiting for your senses to sharpen again so that simple, natural rewards, the taste of plain water after a workout, the view of a sunset, a real conversation, can register as true pleasure rather than just flat, gray experiences.
Okay, so now we connect the mechanism, the upregulation of receptors, the restoration of PFC activity back to the meaning. Neuroscience explains the how, but philosophy explains the why. Why must we commit to this struggle for a life well lived?
Let's start with Aristotle. He grounded virtue not in divine law, but in the simple observation of what makes humans flourish.
He defined temperance or sophrosyne not as this grim, joyless self-denial, but as the mean or the perfect balance between two extremes.
On one end, you have insensibility, which is feeling nothing. That perfectly describes our modern anhedonia. And on the other end, you have self-indulgence, being completely ruled by your appetites.
And what is truly fascinating, and what links perfectly to the hypofrontality we just discussed, is the etymological connection Aristotle made between temperance and intelligence.
This is a devastating insight for our modern age. The sources highlight that the word sophism literally means that which saves or preserves practical wisdom, or phronesis.
So Aristotle is arguing that an intemperate individual, someone who is constantly driven by their appetites, is not merely morally weak.
They're cognitively impaired in the moment of craving.
Think about it. That screaming moment of dopaminergic craving, that overwhelming urge for the immediate snack, the immediate scroll, the immediate ping, that intense biological drive functionally silences the prefrontal cortex, which is the seat of reason and moral judgment.
The connection is so direct. The ancients observed the behavioral outcome, which was poor judgment and short-sightedness. And now, modern neuroscience can pinpoint the exact mechanism: D2 receptor downregulation and the subsequent deactivation of the PFC.
So the intemperate person is, as the report summarized it, functionally stupider in the moment of craving.
You literally cannot access your long-term planning, your ethical calculus, or the wisdom you normally possess until that biological pressure subsides. Temperance is therefore a prerequisite for rationality. If you can't control your appetites, you can't fully deploy your intelligence.
And this brings us to the ultimate goal. Aristotle was wise enough to recognize that the struggle itself isn't the final virtuous state. The person who is constantly fighting their bad desires is merely what he called continent.
They resist, but the desire is still there, nagging at them.
Right. The true goal of sophrosine is to reach the temperate state, where the desire for the excess thing dissipates entirely. It just goes away, leaving your mind clear for higher pursuits.
So the fast is the mechanism that helps take us from that state of continent struggle to one of temperate ease.
Moving forward a few hundred years from Aristotle, the Stoics framed this entire idea of self-control as the absolute core of freedom itself.
Epictetus was crystal clear on this. He said a man chained to his passions is a slave, regardless of his physical circumstances. True freedom is self-mastery.
And this is where we can transition seamlessly from the diagnosis to the actual psychological practice, because their model looks remarkably like modern cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
The Stoic cognitive model provides the perfect framework for managing these modern urges. They outlined a 3-step process.
The first step is fantasia. That's the impression, the stimulus. It's the automatic thought. It's the phone vibrating in your pocket, the immediate urge to seek. It's often outside our immediate control.
The second step is the crucial one. This is the sovereign moment of human freedom. It's called syncatathesis, or assent.
This is the conscious decision to agree with the impression. The moment you say, yes, checking my phone right now is a good and necessary thing to do. This is the moment of judgment. You are the gatekeeper.
And the final step is horme. That's the impulse or the resulting action. Once you give your assent, the impulse follows, and the action becomes nearly inevitable.
The Stoics placed our absolute power, what they called our prohairesis, entirely in that moment, in the ability to withhold syncatathesis.
So the discipline of assent is recognizing that the initial dopamine spike, the fantasia, is just information. It's a chemical fluctuation in your brain. It's a manipulative algorithm. It's not a command.
And we have the absolute power to label it as such and refuse to agree with it.
The dopamine fast, then, is a dedicated, intense practice of refusing to grant assent to every single craving that pops up. It's the exercise of separating the messenger from the message.
You're strengthening your moral will against a world of environmental coercion. If the entire world is engineered to pull the trigger for you, Stoicism teaches you that you still hold the safety mechanism.
And this practice moves us beyond just individual optimization. It moves us into the realm of moral and social responsibility.
The French philosopher Simone Weil offered what is perhaps the most profound modern take on this. She argued that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity.
That sentence is just devastating in our hyper-connected age, isn't it? Weil saw the ability to direct and sustain one's attention as a spiritual, a moral, and even an altruistic capability.
So if we are constantly pulled away by the pings of our devices, that fragmented dopamine bouncing brain is simply incapable of the deep, sustained attention required for moral action, for genuine presence.
The practical implication is huge. If you lack attention, you lack the generosity of presence needed to connect deeply with another person, to listen with compassion, or to engage with difficult long-term problems.
The perpetually distracted mind is inherently incapable of deep empathy or sustained commitment.
And this connects perfectly to contemporary critiques. Specifically, Matthew Crawford's argument that the crisis of attention is a crisis of self-government.
He suggests our attention is essentially a public resource, an attentional commons that has been systematically colonized and monetized by commercial interests.
We assume we're free because we have infinite choice. But the environment is engineered to coerce us into constant, low-level reactivity. We've become passive consumers of prepackaged stimuli.
So the fast, viewed through this philosophical lens, becomes a profound political act of rebellion. It's a refusal to surrender your internal commons to the highest commercial bidder.
And when we talk about liberty, we have to reframe it. The person who is compulsively checking their phone every 3 minutes, claiming I'm free to do this, is confusing negative liberty with positive liberty.
Negative liberty is freedom from constraint.
Positive liberty is the freedom to act in accordance with a higher self-chosen will. The discipline of the fast grants us the positive liberty to focus, to create, and to live with sustained intention. We trade easy comfort for profound mastery.
So the mechanism is understood, the meaning is established. Now we move from theory to implementation. The source material outlines a really structured, tiered intervention based on addiction medicine and CBT. It's designed specifically to reset those neurobiological baselines we discussed.
And we have to start with phase 1, the 30-day reset.
This is the non-negotiable step. So many people attempt a dopamine detox for a weekend, maybe 48 hours.
But the clinical standard, which is backed by addiction specialists, is a mandatory 30-day period for a true neurochemical reset.
And why 30 days specifically? A weekend detox might momentarily reduce the dopamine load, sure, but it is entirely insufficient to break the cycle of dependency and initiate the structural change we need.
You mean the upregulation of those D2 receptors?
Exactly. The acute withdrawal symptoms, the peak anxiety, irritability, the sleeplessness, they typically last through the first 14 days. It is in weeks 3 and 4 that the receptors begin to truly recover, allowing for the restoration of homeostasis and the stabilization of that hedonic set point.
So the goal of this first phase is simple. Withstand the withdrawal long enough for the brain's sensors to heal. But crucially, you don't have to go full monk mode right away. The protocol is tiered based on the severity of your compulsion.
Level 1 is the surgical strike. This is for individuals who can identify a single specific isolated problem that disrupts their life. You eliminate only that one most problematic behavior.
So maybe it's just one app, like TikTok. Or maybe it's all processed sugar consumption.
Right. It requires minimal disruption to the rest of your life, which makes it highly sustainable and a great place to start.
Level 2 is the category ban. This is for those of you feeling a more general malaise, that brain fog, that scattered attention. Here, you eliminate an entire category of stimulus.
Examples would be no screens for entertainment, meaning work screens are okay, but Netflix, YouTube, and video games are banned. Or no all ultra-processed food and alcohol. It's a broader intervention, but it's still focused.
And finally, level 3 is monk mode. This is the full, comprehensive reset. And it's really reserved for those experiencing severe anhedonia, significant mood volatility, or a clear behavioral addiction.
This involves eliminating all digital entertainment, all processed sugar, all alcohol, excessive news consumption, and sometimes even highly stimulating conversation. The focus is solely on simple tasks and essential obligations.
But regardless of the level you choose, we have to acknowledge that willpower is finite. Environmental design, on the other hand, is infinite. The sources stress the absolute necessity of self-binding strategies.
You're using external friction to protect your own sovereign decision-making process.
Because willpower always fails when the craving is screaming at you at 2 in the morning. Friction is always stronger than pure willpower.
This means physical barriers. Buying a time delay phone lockbox that literally forces you to wait hours before you can access your device. It means unplugging your gaming console and putting it in a hard-to-reach closet.
Or using digital barriers. Apps like Freedom or Opal are robust app blockers that you can't just easily bypass with a single click in a moment of weakness.
And some of the simplest interventions can be the most profoundly effective. We love the Foyer method.
It's so simple. You just commit to charging all of your devices outside of your bedroom. The bedroom must become an absolute sanctuary, free of these dopaminergic triggers.
This simple shift reinforces that positive liberty we talked about, and it supports restorative sleep, which is absolutely critical for brain healing.
So that's the setup, but then you have to get through it. Phase 2 is about managing the withdrawal.
During those first couple of weeks, the withdrawal symptoms will be intense. Your brain is going to scream for the quick fix it's used to. This is where the philosophical training of Stoic ascent is applied through a clinical technique called urge surfing.
Urge surfing is a concept developed in CBT, and it's heavily endorsed in the source material. It is the practical method for applying synchetathesis.
It teaches you that a craving is not a permanent state. It's a temporary physiological wave that passes through you. The sources confirm that most intense cravings only last for about 20 to 30 minutes.
If you can just get past the crest of that wave, it will break and subside naturally on its own.
So let's walk you through the 4-step protocol. Step 1 is acknowledge. When the urge hits, that immediate, overwhelming drive, do not fight it and do not suppress it.
Suppression just makes the urge stronger.
Exactly. Instead, just label it objectively, as if you're a scientist observing an external event. I am noticing an urge to check my email. You're creating separation between your sovereign self and the compulsion.
Step 2 is locate, somatic awareness. This is crucial for grounding the psychological experience in your body. Turn your attention inward and identify where the urge is manifesting physically.
Is it a tightness in your chest, a buzzing sensation in your stomach, a tension in your shoulders?
By getting really specific about the physical sensation, you reframe the craving. It's no longer an abstract emotional crisis. It's a manageable physical event.
Step 3 is ride the wave. Visualize the urge rising like a wave in the ocean. Watch it grow more intense, crest at its 15 or 20-minute peak, and then inevitably break and subside.
You are the surfer. Your only goal is to endure that peak without wiping out and giving in. You are retraining your brain that this discomfort is temporary and, most importantly, it's not lethal.
And step 4 is breathe. Use your breath as a constant anchor. Focus deeply on the inhale and the exhale. This simple act does 2 things. It grounds you in the present moment, and it proves to your system, to your proherasis, that the discomfort is survivable without reaching for the substance.
Every time you do this, you dramatically build your distress tolerance.
So once that 30-day reset is complete, the focus shifts entirely. You move from stopping bad habits to intentionally installing good ones that will support your new, higher hedonic set point.
This requires some thoughtful environmental and nutritional design. So let's start with nutritional support, because your diet plays a direct role in dopamine synthesis and regulation.
We need the foundational building block for dopamine, which is an amino acid called tyrosine.
The metabolic pathway is very clear. Phenylalanine, which is in protein, converts to tyrosine. Tyrosine converts to L-DOPA. And L-DOPA finally converts to dopamine.
So the recovery protocol recommends consuming tyrosine-rich foods early in the day. Things like eggs, lean meats, almonds, avocados. This ensures your brain has the necessary precursors to rebuild and stabilize its neurotransmitter supply.
It directly supports the upregulation process we talked about.
Yeah.
But just as important is avoiding the sugar trap.
High glycemic sugar triggers a massive, unnatural dopamine release, very similar to drugs of abuse, and it's quickly followed by a blood sugar crash, hypoglycemia.
And that crash triggers anxiety and intense, immediate cravings, which can completely destabilize the hard-won clarity you just gained.
So stable blood sugar, which you get from a high-protein, low-glycemic index diet, is really the foundation for stable will and stable focus.
Moving beyond nutrition, we have to aggressively reintroduce boredom as a nutrient. The modern mind suffers from what the sources call solitude deprivation.
We constantly fill every spare moment with input podcasts, music, social media. But boredom is the necessary gateway to the default mode network, or the DMN.
The DMN is the brain state that activates when we stop engaging with the external world. It's responsible for creativity, long-term self-reflection, emotional processing, memory consolidation, and future planning.
When your brain is deprived of external input, it switches from the executive attention network to the DMN, and that is where true original thought and emotional healing actually occur.
The tragedy of solitude deprivation is that we never give our brain the necessary time to process its emotional backlog.
And that backlog, the unprocessed anxiety from work, the minor irritations from your day, those ambiguous feelings, it just builds up, leading to that chronic, low-grade anxiety that people then instinctively try to scroll away from.
The recommended antidote for this is the analog walk, or what some call the Thoreau walk.
This is a non-negotiable daily protocol. 30 to 45 minutes, you leave your phone at home, no music, no podcasts, just you and the world.
This is intentional boredom. It forces your brain to switch into the DMN and process its internal state. You are practicing self-government and strengthening the muscles of sustained internal attention.
Finally, after the 30-day reset, we have to reintroduce technology, but we do it intentionally. We practice digital minimalism. We treat technology strictly as a tool for intentional use, never as a source of accidental entertainment.
This involves strategies like batching communications. You check your email, your texts, your social media only at designated times, rather than grazing constantly throughout the day. Every time you open an app, you're pulling that slot machine lever. Batching just reduces the number of pulls.
It also means using environmental hacks, like setting your phone screen to grayscale in the accessibility settings. This instantly removes the vibrant, colorful slot machine cues that are designed to trigger your visual cortex and your dopamine-seeking system. The world on your phone becomes less visually urgent.
And the simple but incredibly powerful one-screen rule. Never use your phone while you're watching TV or while you're eating or doing any other primary activity. This prevents the fragmentation of attention and forces deep single-task engagement, which retrains your brain for focus.
The journey of dopamine fasting, or really the practice of modern temperance, is fundamentally a journey of return. The goal is to get back to that biological baseline where simple, real-world stimuli, the warmth of a good cup of coffee, the genuine sound of a friend's laughter, the depth of the sunset, can elicit that genuine neurochemical response of joy and contentment again.
When the D2 receptors upregulate, when the homeostatic balance is restored, the world regains its texture. Focus deepens, emotional volatility stabilizes, and we move from being reactive consumers of endless stimuli to intentional architects of our own minds and lives. The refusal of the immediate impulse is a profound assertion of dignity and agency, a fascinating dissection of the human condition. To continue building your arsenal of knowledge, please subscribe to our channel, Mind Architect Lab, on YouTube. And to access the full research report used for this episode, check the link in the description. Until next time.
And as you embark on reclaiming your attention and rebuilding your baseline, consider Matthew Crawford's idea that our attention is a public resource colonized by commercial interests. If temperance is an act of liberation for the individual, what larger political or social responsibility do we have to reclaim the attentional commons for everyone, ensuring that agency and focus are the defaults, not the exceptions?